Good afternoon, everyone. Today, I'm going to be speaking about embracing failure, realizing optionality, and thinking differently. As way of introduction, my name is Kunal Mehta. I'm a recovering investment banker, an author, and an entrepreneur. 2 years ago, I made the decision to leave my job in investment banking in search of some more entrepreneurial and inspiring work. And I hit some early heartbreaks and some failures, but I've since bounced back, and I'm now the founder of a real estate venture in New York City. I'm working on a startup that will help make content more engaging and interesting. And I'm also a former finance and strategy associate at the nonprofit Charity Water that has provided clean and safe drinking water to over 5.2 million people worldwide. I think that's impact that really matters. I've had the unique privilege in the last year of working with several business schools and business students. And what I've noticed is that many young professionals, we face a very tough decision. And that decision is, do you pursue the high status, high profile, high paying jobs that the JP Morgans, the McKinseys, the BCGs, the Goldman Sachs offer? Or do you pursue something, and that's where status, reputation, payment is pretty irrefutable? Or do you pursue something really far off the beaten path? Something where career fulfillment and satisfaction might be more attainable? That's a very tough decision that college graduates across the country and young professionals across the country are facing every year. And it's a decision that I'm hoping our conversations today and in the coming weeks and coming months will help make it a bit easier for you. What helped me get through that was through a series of conversations with some of the greatest entrepreneurs of our generation. And these conversations happened at very raw moments in their careers. It happened on one side of the spectrum that we're so used to hearing with an 18 or 19-year-old who began building a venture, stumbled on some early successes, within 6 months got venture backed, and by the end of the year had this huge valuation on their head, and was on the cover of the big magazines, blogs, tech journals, and found that entrepreneurial fame that so many of us crave. But that's a side of the story that we've heard about so often. So I wanted to focus on the other side. And I spoke to men and women in their late 30s, early 40s, who had been building for 7, 8, 9, 10 years, but never found that same success. And they never found that entrepreneurial fame, or never had that impact that they had once envisioned. But despite where they were on the spectrum, these men and women were building with this fire in their stomach that was incredibly inspiring. So I took these conversations, and I've since published them in a book titled Disruptors with the purpose to inspire young professionals to pursue work that they truly care about. And I've been on the book tour for the past year, and I'm working with a growing number of disenchanted consultants, lawyers, bankers, corporate escapees, and people who want to do something different, and they want to be someone different, but they don't know how or where to begin. And I can empathize with them because when I was 17, I was offered a full scholarship by JP Morgan to attend the NYU Stern School of Business. And at the time, Wall Street seemed like the perfect profession to be in. Books like Liar's Poker, movies like Boiler Room, today it's Wolf of Wall Street, make this seem like this great career where you're going to learn transferable skills and then go and build out this amazing career. But pretty soon, reality started to set in. At 17, I was one of the youngest bankers on the street, and by 20, I realized just how much I hated it. I wanted to do something different, I wanted to be someone different, but I didn't know where to start. And everywhere I looked, there were people younger than myself, my colleagues, and other people in different industries who were doing work that they cared about and having incredible innovations in disruptive technologies in healthcare, in mobile, in fashion, and other places that they cared about. And I started building, to my own fault, I started building this false sense of confidence when you're working in this job and you're dealing with some of the smartest graduates from across the country and you're wearing a suit to work every day and your managers are telling you that you're doing a good job. You start to develop this false sense of confidence. So in that false sense of confidence, I thought that these skills that I had built would transfer to any other industry I worked in, and maybe I'd have a multi-billion-dollar valuation in my head also within 6 months. So in that false sense of confidence, I marched into my boss's office and I told him, I quit. I want to do something different, I want to be someone different, and this is where it starts. He had seen that story so many times play out before, he understood. In that false sense of confidence, I marched through the exit doors, and I saw this empty canvas of things I can build and places I can have an impact, and that excitement lasted me a couple of days, it lasted me a week, and then a month later, I realized I had no idea what the hell I was actually doing. My savings account was tested. Mentors that I'd once trusted and looked up to were now looking at me and saying I'd made a very stupid decision to leave my secure job during one of the greatest recessions our generation had ever seen. This resume you'd been building for 5 or 6 years was now completely worthless and meaningless. But what kept me going through it was this understanding that there had been hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people before me that had gone through this. They had left positions of security and conformity to pursue work that they truly cared about, and there would be hundreds after me. So I wanted to understand, how did these men and women, through resilience and persistence, how did they eventually become the Scott Harrisons and the Lauren Bush Laurens and the Kunal Mehtas and the Vin Vicantis and the other entrepreneurs that I'd eventually speak to for Disruptors? But I didn't want to talk about the stories from that ivory tower where they tell us, this is my product, this is my valuation, and the tailored press releases that we're so used to reading. I want to focus on those first 6 months. I want to know, what were they thinking? What were they going through when they were sitting in a room like this looking for inspiration? How did they battle through those early criticism and those early failures? And how do they bounce back? How do they develop that idea and think of where it could go? So when I finally sat down with them, that's what I focused on. And I took these conversations, and some interesting themes started coming out. So I want to plant an idea in this room, and I hope it becomes the basis for a lot of what we do in the coming weeks, months, years. And that idea is embrace failure, realize optionality, and think differently. So how many of you are familiar with a company called Spanx, or show of hands? It's all the women. It's a shapewear and undergarment company that was created by Sarah Blakely. And she's one of the youngest females on the Forbes billionaire list. And what Sarah credits to her success was the fact that her father would push her to fail. And I thought that was a really wild concept. What father would push his daughter to fail? What kind of parenting is that? But as I watched the video and I got further into the conversation, what Sarah was saying was that every single night when she would come home, her father would sit down with her and ask her, Sarah, what did you fail at today? And if she didn't give a good enough answer, she had disappointed him. Well, what Sarah's father was trying to do was to get her to think outside of that structured framework that we're so used to operating in. The second you go into middle school, high school, college, your professional working environment, you're working to the next milestone, and you're building up your resume, so you're living someone else's journey and presenting yourself in what you think they think is correct. And that gets stifling. So what he wanted her to do was to think outside of that structured framework and find these pockets of innovation and take some risks early on when the implications didn't matter so much. And in doing so, she failed several times, but she found things that she wanted to work on and that what she could dedicate her life to for 10 years or beyond. And she started thinking differently about those problems and eventually stumbled on Spanx. So you might look at me and say, okay, that's only one case where failure worked out for someone. And that's what I thought too, but as I started writing Disruptors and speaking to these 30, 35 entrepreneurs, that theme kept coming up again and again. So there's Kunal Mehta, who's another young Indian male like myself, and for the other young Indian males in this room, you can empathize with him when he went to his family and said, I don't want to be a doctor. So the entire trauma that went through that entire family unit must have been pretty exciting. But he said, I want to focus on business, and I want to be in business. So he went to the Wharton School of Business and got an offer letter from the best bank. He got an offer letter from Goldman Sachs. He hung that up on his wall and said, you know what, that's not the kind of business I want to focus on. I want to work as an entrepreneur. That's what really makes me passionate. So it was in the 90s, the tech bubble was going on, and he began building this mobile venture to help connect people with events around them. He began building it out, saw some early successes, secured $2 million in funding, and a year later, the entire tech bubble went bust, and Kunal was forced to file for bankruptcy. So now look around you, and imagine you've had this idea. You're a 21-year-old in college, 22-year-old, and you have this idea. You're deciding not to go down the secure career path. You're telling all of your friends. You're posting it on Facebook. You're putting it up on Twitter. You're rallying support for it. You've invested all of your personal reputation into this project, and you're just trying to get everybody pumped up about it the way you are. And now look at those same people a year later, and you're going back to them and telling them, I'm sorry, I failed. I have to file for bankruptcy. That's a very candid and raw moment where most rational individuals would turn away and say, you know what, we're going to go get a secure job now. Kunal knew that's not what's going to make him happy. He knew the Goldman Sachs and the JP Morgans will always be there. He needed to try this. He needed to get better at it. So he stuck with it, and he took some redeeming qualities from this venture that had just failed, began building out again, got better at the process, learned from those early failures, and eventually sold that company to Omnicom. Since that point, Kunal has built several more companies. He's a philanthropist in New York, and he recently closed a $55 million funding round to invest in aspiring entrepreneurs building mobile startups. That's another story. So this idea of embracing failure, realizing optionality, and thinking differently is very important in social impact. I've had the unique privilege of working with this incredible organization for the past 2 years called Charity Water. And Charity Water's mission is to provide clean and safe drinking water in developing countries. But the story of its founder is even more interesting. Scott Harrison was a nightclub promoter in New York, and he was a poster boy for all things Vice. Budweiser and Bacardi were paying him to drink alcohol publicly. He had a beautiful loft in the city. He was dating models, driving a nice car, drugs, gambling, all of that. And he hit this cathartic moment of reflection where he wasn't proud of the legacy he was leaving behind and said, I want to do something different. I want to be someone different, and I don't know where to start. At that point, he decided to go volunteer in Africa. He said, what's completely juxtaposed against this? And he volunteered on a medical brigade ship in Africa and saw something that I had the opportunity to see recently myself. So charity where I went to Ethiopia, and we were driving for miles and miles and miles and miles. Eventually, we hit this school, completely barren land, where 700 students congregate every day. And we went down to their local water source. And it's a narrow stream, and at the top of the water source, there's donkeys defecating, there's children bathing, and in the water itself, there's moss, algae, tadpoles, worms. And at the other side is a woman who's taking this water, collecting it in a container, pouring it through her dress as a filtration for the sticks and the worms, and pouring it into another container that she'll then take up to her family so that they can drink. And this was their only option. So yeah, she's filtered out some of the big, nasty stuff, but the unseen bacteria is still going in, and it's leading to some issues that Scott saw. It's leading to dysentery, diarrhea, and a variety of other illnesses that Scott worked with in the past. So he came back, and as a young visionary entrepreneur, he said, you know what? Water is a basic elemental need that everybody needs. So I'm going to come back home, and I'm going to set up this nonprofit. He was charged up. So he came home, and he had to think differently about it, because as he started showing this nonprofit to people and getting them riled up about the mission, he realized that people aren't so fond of nonprofits. They consider them a black hole of funding. You put $1 in, how much is really going to the people in need? Is it 20 cents? Is it 40 cents? Is it 80 cents? How much is being eaten up in operational costs? So Scott said, as a young visionary entrepreneur who embraced this early failure of some of the conversations and thinking differently about the problems he was going to face, I'm going to flip this entire model on its head. And he changed the nonprofit model and said 100% of public donations will now go directly to the field. And people started rallying around that. And he said, I'll cover my operational funding stream from a completely different angle, and I'll think about it. So he built that out. And in the last 8 years, people have rallied around charity water. And then the other thing he realized was that nonprofits don't do such a great job with branding. They don't empower the stories of the people that we're impacting and affecting. So he said, how would an Airbnb or an Apple think about branding a nonprofit? And he invested more in that talent and building out charity water. And the impact they've had over the last 8 years has been remarkable. Something like over 15,000 water projects in 24 countries, serving over 5.2 million people. Again, I think that's impact that really matters. I'm going to leave with one final thought, and that is that this sexiness and this craziness and the hype around startups and entrepreneurship has gotten a bit out of control. It's more about personal branding now, and it's more about who's on the cover of which magazine and who's tweeting what and who's following who, and it's really less about building products and more about personal brand. And it's gotten a little bit disgusting about the valuations and where they're going, and everybody has their opinion about a tech bubble coming. But in these conversations and in speaking at all these universities and working with so many different students, what I've realized is that the real attractiveness to entrepreneurship and to the founders of big companies is the fact that these are men and women living life on their own terms. And they're building products they truly care about. They're stepping on the off-beaten path and building products that they know they would be willing to dedicate several years to because they think it's going to have a personal impact in their life and in the lives of others. And I think that begins with this idea of embracing failure, realizing optionality, and thinking differently. Thank you so much.